Welcome to the We Talk Health Podcast, the official podcast for West Tennessee Healthcare. Please be advised that this podcast is not intended to replace any medical advice. Always follow your medical professional's advice and direction. Nothing said in this podcast is intended to supersede or supplement the direction of your medical caretakers. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at wetalkhealthpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our best to answer any questions you may have.
Welcome to another episode of We Talk Health. My name is Will Kwasigroh, and joining me today is Hailey Archer. Hailey is the clinical dietitian at Kirkland Cancer Center. Hailey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for coming in today.
Absolutely.
You're here today to talk about the cooking demonstration video that we did that kind of focuses on colorectal health and the food you chose, which the recipe was delicious. I was fortunate enough to be on the video crew when they were filming, and that comes with the perk of being able to eat the food after it's cooked. So Hailey cooked a spinach and feta quiche with a sweet potato crust. Now, I got to be honest, at first I didn't expect it to really work, I guess, but it was delicious. So I guess my first question, why did you choose that recipe?
So for a number of reasons, you're getting vegetables, you're getting some dairy, you're getting protein. I just kind of wanted to show that you can really consume healthy dishes while also kind of following those general guidelines that we tell people, just not only is having a healthy diet, but also things to help reduce your risk of colorectal cancer.
Gotcha.
It's actually something we've continued to make at my house since then, and we've done
Really?
different variations of, throwing in Parmesan cheese instead of the feta and just some different things like that. So we've had a lot of fun with it at my house.
That's cool. So you said one reason you chose it is to help reduce risk for cancer, specifically colorectal cancer.
Yes.
So who's considered at risk or has increased risk for people to get CRC?
Sure. So we know that individuals that are aged 50 and older are at a higher risk. People that have a history of tobacco and alcohol use are also going to be at an increased risk. People that are physically inactive or are overweight, obese, are going to be at greater risk. Obviously, there's a history. If you have family history of having colorectal cancer, you may be at greater risk, or if you have things like polyps or different things that have been found within the colon. People that consume a diet that's high in red meat and also processed meats are going to be at greater risk. And when I'm talking about processed meats, we're talking about your sandwich meats, your bacon, your sausage, bologna, hot dogs, things like that. So if you consume a diet high in those, you are going to be at greater risk for that as well. And then also just your race and ethnicity. We know that there's certain people that are just more prone to getting colorectal cancer.
Gotcha. So how can someone reduce their risk?
So kind of by doing the opposite of some of the things that I just mentioned, obviously avoiding tobacco products, limiting your alcohol consumption. Any alcohol consumption puts you at increased risk. However, we typically tell women that they should consume at most 1 drink daily, and for men, that's 2 drinks daily. But I do want to emphasize any alcohol consumption still can increase your risk.
Gotcha.
Certainly, choosing a diet that's composed of more lean meats, avoiding those processed meats. We typically tell people, too, in regards to red meat, to consume less than 18 ounces per week, which one way you can do that is just by predominantly consuming a plant-based diet, and that helps kind of all of those things a little bit more. Being physically active, we kind of want people to try to be as active as possible and get at least 150 minutes of activity, 75 of, and that's when I'm talking about weekly, 150 minutes weekly, or 75 minutes of strenuous activity. Another way some people will do that is 30 to 60 minutes kind of daily or 5 days a week, that kind of thing, if you look at it that way. That'll help you maintain a healthy weight as well. And then a couple of other things that are really important is kind of that I mentioned, there's family history that can play a role in this. It's important just to know your family history, know if you've had siblings, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, anything like that have had colorectal cancer, because those things can certainly put you at greater risk. We know there's hereditary things, genetic mutations, and so it may be that you have to get screened earlier than the typical recommendation, which is now starting at 45.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know we've done on the podcast about this before, but just to kind of rope those into it, some of the tools that could be used would be like the fecal occult test, which if I understand it correctly is something that you get from your primary care physician, and you can complete that test at home by yourself.
Yes,
Is that
and,
okay?
And you can return it to pharmacies. Obviously, the gold standard is getting a colonoscopy, and
Right.
that used to be, they would say at 50 years you would start getting your colonoscopies. They have actually reduced that to 45. So
Gotcha.
that's been within, I believe, the last year or so. So definitely take note of that. If you're within that age range, go ahead and start getting those colonoscopies.
Okay. So what are some symptoms?
So they can be kind of broad. Big things to look out for: if there's blood in your stool or you're having rectal bleeding, if you've had a sudden change in your bowel movements, if you've started having lots of diarrhea or unexplained weight loss. Some people will actually report some constipation, or that when they do void, they don't feel like they're completely emptying. That
Okay.
can be another sign. Vomiting, those are all kind of some things that could be, certainly symptomatic of colorectal cancer. Now, a lot of the time, they may not be, but certainly those are things you just kind of need to know your body. And if you start noticing that there's changes, it's always a good idea to go get checked out by your
Right.
primary care physician. So even if it's not colorectal cancer, it may be something else underlying.
Right, and at least you would know if it's nothing. So were there any guidelines that you used when it comes to the recipe that you chose?
Sure. So I tried to pick a recipe that met a lot of the USDA MyPlate guidelines. Those, in brief, are consuming a diet that's lean proteins, making half your grains whole grains. When you're looking at your plate, you want at least half your plate to be fruits and vegetables. Specifically within that, you want to focus on whole fruits and kind of varying your veggies. You want to have a really well-rounded, and a lot of the time people will say colorful diet. And we're talking lean proteins, things like fish or chicken, as opposed to maybe doing a steak or a ribeye or, something
Gotcha.
like that. Because again, for colorectal cancer, we're going to want to be mindful of our red meat consumption.
Sure.
So with this recipe, obviously the eggs, you're going to get a good source of protein, but they're not going to be considered one of those red meat products. You're getting the sweet potatoes, you're getting the spinach. All of those things are going to be getting you a wide variety of vegetables. So it was just kind of a good all around but tasty meal to choose.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, when you sent me the recipe initially, I was like, I don't know how this is gonna go.
It looks kind of questionable on
a little
paper,
bit.
but I promise y'all, it really was good.
Yeah. So obviously you're the clinical dietitian, so you definitely know what would and what would not be good together. So
I'd like to think so,
Right.
but my husband might differ,
Sure.
have a different opinion on that. But
yeah. Coming from firsthand experience, I got to eat it. It was delicious. I was very glad I was in the room when it was made. Tell me about the recipe a little bit.
Okay, so I kind of mentioned already, you're getting a good protein source, you're getting some vegetables in there. The feta cheese gave it a nice little, an extra little flavor profile that I didn't really know what it was going to taste like, but it turned out being,
A little bit of a zing. It was nice.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
good.
it was. But it had some pretty easy ingredients, nothing that was too hard to get. I mean, you're looking at spinach and onion, a little bit of oil. We use some canola oil or vegetable oil. You're getting your sweet potatoes in there as well. The feta cheese that I mentioned. And then just some different seasonings, your black pepper, your salt, some crushed red pepper, and then some eggs and egg whites. The other interesting, nice thing about this recipe is that it used 4 whole eggs, but then also 2 egg whites. So you're still getting that protein, but you're not getting everything that you would get from the entire egg. You're just
Gotcha.
getting that good protein from the egg whites as
Yeah.
well. Milk also is another ingredient in there too, and I think y'all are going to post the recipe as well.
We will. So the recipe, the video to the recipe, and I guess the ingredient list will be in the description of the podcast. So if you're listening and you want to see that, you can look there for it. One thing I realized just reading over the list is most of these ingredients are typically going to be found in your kitchen anyway. You might have to go get the spinach and the sweet potatoes if you don't already have those, but it just seems like something that would be easy that you probably already have.
It's a different kind of recipe, so it's things that you maybe do have in your kitchen and you just hadn't thought to put together before.
Right.
And I kind of mentioned earlier, we've at my house have continued to make variations of this, kind of just with whatever we had on hand. We still use the sweet potato crust, but we had obviously lots of other different fillings in addition to the eggs. So I think we didn't have spinach one day, or we had a different cheese, or, just different things like that. So you can kind of play around with it too.
Yeah.
It's got just a good base to it.
Yeah.
And the sweet potato crust is something I hadn't actually ever done before. So I was pleasantly surprised that it turned out as well as it did.
As was I. Well, like I said, this recipe was absolutely delicious. There's going to, like I said, a picture, the video, and the recipe will be in the description if you're interested in trying it out. And then just let us know how it was. If you liked it, if you didn't, if you have suggestions for other recipes, we'd love to see what you have to say. So, Hailey, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me, Will.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of We Talk Health.